This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. TalkCatholic.com with Tim Kilcoyne. It is our first Saturday of the month. Don't you forget, it's also the month of Mary, the month of May. So first Saturday devotions for sure. And we will return in the second part of today's show to our book review, Mother Angelica's Answers, Not Promises. But first, let's get to our part 3 interview with Nancy Sacco, Catholic lawyer.
Courts and the so-called expert clearly reflect the changing ethos within the law profession. I wonder whether your father saw that transition when it was happening, because clearly he was from the World War II generation.
Yeah.
So he obviously saw a dramatic change in the courts.
Oh, sure. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, he was a city guy, and he was, towards the end of his career, he went to the DA's office just to finish up his career and collect his pension and everything.
Yeah.
So he was in the DA's office working as an attorney for, I don't know, maybe a few years, and then he developed a heart condition and ended up, he had to retire, and then he got Alzheimer's.
Okay.
But he really saw the decline in the family structure.
That's it.
He was assigned out in Southie, and he really worked hard, and he really tried to help the defendants. Because a lot of them were drug addicted, and a lot of suicide there at that particular time when he was over in Southie. There were a lot of suicides of young people, severe drug addiction in that part of Boston. So he saw, because he grew up with a very strong family, and then he provided us a very strong family. So to see people not have that advantage, and you see it now in society, they're saying the suicides of young people is spiking, and I think it's everything goes back to the family.
Yeah, and
Dismantle the family.
Right, and there's the kind of chicken and egg question about what started what first. Was it the decline, the basic deterioration of homespun values in the home that then spreads out to the greater society at large, i.e. the courts? Or did the courts play the leading role in dismantling the Judeo-Christian ethos by striking prayer out of the public school in 62? You know what I'm saying? A lot of people would argue that was the beginning of it all.
Yes, I think I would agree with that. I think the higher courts, you mean, maybe not juvenile court, but like the higher courts, I think when the pill contraception came into play, that took away, that separated sexuality from the fruitfulness of sexuality and the commitment of marriage, and so it took away that responsibility, and that started the cracks in the family.
Exactly.
And I think just like Pope John Paul II, and I think it was Pope Paul VI that was wrote about that. I think that those things, and then one sin begets another sin.
Very good. Yeah, no, I personally, I always go right back to contraception, because that was a direct assault on what you're saying, the splitting up of sex from responsibility now. But the other, David Barden, in a book called America to Pray or Not to Pray, I was talking about recently, he really suggests that there was no national outcry to get rid of prayer in the public schools. It was just a bunch of squeaky wheels who were likely atheists or agnostics at least, and they got their way, and it seems to me that when you look at this book on Who Killed the American Family, Phyllis Schlafly spent her whole career as an advocate for women, trying to convince them that, you're not getting anything from this new liberation movement that you call it. You're actually getting enslaved without a husband if you buy into all of this mania of feminism.
It was the Cosmo Woman, my generation, Cosmopolitan magazine, the Cosmo Woman. You can have it all,
right?
And you can't, I mean.
Right.
I had a career, but I had to tailor my career. Luckily, I was able to tailor my career to my children because they were my priority.
Right.
So I stopped trial work in order to raise my children, and then when they were in school age, I could kind of go back a little, but be home for them when they got home from school.
Right.
But
the degradation of maternal instincts themselves.
Yes, and that trying to create this resentment of women.
Right.
Well, you're just a mother.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing about my story is that really all I ever wanted to do was get married and have a family. And God didn't have that plan for me initially,
Right.
And so I didn't meet my husband till later. So,
yeah.
I ended up doing all this stuff and I really loved it. But if you asked me, even in that time, if I could, if my husband were here and that was it and I could have children, that would have been, I would never have gone, I think I would never have gone to law school. I would have gotten married right away and had as many kids as I possibly could.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, and this should have been, this still should be primary for an overwhelming majority of women in their aspiration. I was just looking at a movie I was talking about over the holidays. It was called A Thanksgiving to Remember, and it was all about, the career, jet set, high strung, high maintenance woman that was having it all, quote unquote, and it was like a female version of It's a Wonderful Life. A guardian angel came into her life and just plucked her out and said, I think you need some time in the home.
Right.
And so she went into the home and fell in love with the family and the kids and all the rest of it. And I think you know the ending. Didn't want to go back to the crazy world that she was in and desperately lonely.
That's the thing. I've listened to women on radio shows talking about how they bought the lie. Have a career, have just you. Have all the great clothes, the travel, whatever.
Right.
And then when they passed that time where they could have children, they realized, wow, I missed that.
Right.
And that would have been, because it is a lot of work. It's the most important thing a person can do is to raise a family.
Absolutely.
Raising future generations.
Raising children of God and citizens of your country. And that's why there was always such a good connection between patriotism and being a Catholic, right?
That's right.
They weren't incongruous. This was almost synonymous. You just loved your country because you loved God, and vice versa.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm always going back to the pill of myself relative to the domino that got going, because that really was incredibly disruptive. And I did a recent book review on Keeping the Church Catholic with John Paul II by Monsignor George A. Kelly, and he was talking about all the battles that John Paul II had relative to the American hierarchy, and it all started right there. It was all about contraception, and then that resulted in a terrible divide amongst the clergy. And once you get the house divided, oh boy, the devil's going to have a field day. And what do you get? Silence. Silence. No more sermons about relevant issues that are killing family life. I often wonder if the bishops worked a little more closely hand in hand with the civil lawyers and judges to try to, do more protests and write more letters to the secular world of jurisprudence, would it make a difference at this point?
I don't know.
Because we had since departed, Dr. Mark Rollo did a lot of great work in the pro-life movement, and I was interviewing him about a year ago, and he talked about just being dismissed down at the legislature. I won't say which one, but it's awful close to home. And if you started talking theologically in the public square, i.e., down there at the legislature with politicians, you were virtually, it was like you came in from Mars.
Right.
And so speak, if you want, to this secular religion that they have. They're imposing their value woke agenda, which is nothing more than a secular humanism on steroids, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Talk a little bit as a Catholic lawyer to what did separation of church from state mean? And again, it's not in the documents, right? Was that Thomas Jefferson that talked about it? But it's not in the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, it's always been it's funny how the media and people like that can twist things, and they change the words and stuff. So it was separation of church and state, but it was really separating the state from the church.
Very good.
Because in England, when the reason why they came over to the colonies was because the people were not able to practice the religion that they wanted to.
Right.
Whatever denomination it was.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't the Church of England, but it was
Yeah.
other denominations.
Yeah.
And they wanted to be free to practice their faith.
Right.
And so that's why they made sure there was no more state intrusion or state religion that would dominate, and that they were free to follow their conscience and to follow their own faith.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that the church was interfering with the state, it was that the state was interfering with the church.
Right.
But people commonly think it's the other way around.
So at that time, it would be common that if you had a town meeting, so to speak, people were deeply religious, much more so than they are today, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
we're in the minority.
Right. So at that town meeting, there would be lots of feisty spiritual conversation.
Sure.
That would be my understanding, is that, the courts or the public square would reflect the ethos of the people at large. And at that time, they were mostly, Christian of some sort and deeply devout.
Right.
So the idea of eliminating their voices from that public square was anathema, right? You just wouldn't go there. You wonder how they get away with what they're doing.
I think what you said is the squeaky wheel, because I think you have these, you always see it at Christmas time. We don't want to have the creche there, and we're going to have a satanic thing.
Right.
And all this, and I think probably I would say there's a silent majority. I would like to think
for sure.
People that don't we want to have a problem, whatever, let them do what they want, that kind of and I think as Catholics and Christians that we're always taught turn the other cheek and and try to love one another and this and that, but sometimes we do have to be a Joan of Arc and a John the Baptist and speak the truth in love. I don't mean that you have to be disrespectful, but
the wink and the smile isn't going to cut it anymore.
No. I think people are afraid of conflict, and nowadays they're afraid to be canceled.
Therefore, there's got to be there's got to be some galvanizing, bringing the people together. I always use the example of Mothers Against Drunk Driving back there in the 70s, right?
Right.
Yeah. Once you get the mothers to bond together a little bit and recognize this is your flesh and blood, right? Literally.
Right.
You can move mountains. You can move mountains, and hopefully that's what's going to happen with this evil woke agenda that is being thrust upon us.
I hope people are starting to wake up. Sometimes I do think I'll hear things in the news, and even in other countries, people rebelling against. You're seeing more of these leaders of different governments, especially in Europe, where they're stronger. They're more conservative, say. Like through Italy, and I heard even in South America, and a few countries where people are starting to fight back and saying no. We don't want all this crime. We don't want all of these other issues. We want to live in a civilized community, and have rule of law and.
Where's the voice of the church, Nancy?
Yes. I think that's a big problem, because I think they feel, as we know, there's good and bad, everywhere, and I had heard, I don't know if it was Bishop Sheen, sometimes I watch his old shows, and he talked about, I don't know if it was Stalin or Lenin, who said that they would bring down America, but not by battles, but from within. And there was a woman that had written a book that was involved with trying to bring communism into the church, bringing communist priests in. And there was talk about bringing homosexual priests into the church. And,
Infiltration. Taylor Marshall's book really spells that out.
And you see now all these people from that generation are in places of power, in the courts.
Yes.
And in schools. I mean, my kids have gone to school, and went to the school they were indoctrinating.
Yeah.
And did not like to be called out on it, but
right.
they were.
Yeah.
And they are.
Yeah, going back to our alma mater, BC, in my graduate days, I was actually being forced to use he and she pronouns for God.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't. I didn't, and I probably took a lower grade because of it, but the pressure was on.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, then, I had a conversation with someone like that. Oh, well, God is a she. I'm like, no. Jesus spoke of God the Father as Father, as He.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
That's how He wants us to pray to God. It's
Very
not
good.
like our mother who art in heaven.
Right.
It's our Father who art in heaven.
Yep.
And so I take my direction from Him.
Yes.
And when people deny that there's a hell or a devil,
right.
Jesus spoke about it constantly.
Right.
Warning us, be prepared, stay on the right path.
Right.
Nancy, let's break right there. In tribute to Our Lady during the month of May, I think we paid her honor with what we had to say about motherhood today. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. From the Daughters of St. Paul, be it done unto me. Do bear with me, my voice, that is. I've been nursing a pretty bad cold, and one of the great miracles unto itself is having my voice for 7 years now going on without losing it completely. Oh, so many consolations. Thank you, Jesus. So let's now talk about faith with the great Mother Mary Angelica. From her book, Answers, Not Promises. She says, faith is a fascinating subject I think that everyone has to confront or at least ponder the question of belief in God. A reasonable person simply cannot live an entire lifetime without asking himself why billions of people throughout history have worshipped a God who is invisible. Asking why is it so hard to believe is like asking why you fall in love. There are no recipes, no shortcuts. God inspires you with a desire for Him, and slowly you begin to know that there is another presence besides your own. Actually, I think that everyone, if given a choice, would prefer to know that there is a God who loves them, and whom he or she can love in return. The need to know and love God is, at some level, as primary as the need to be fed and clothed. We cannot live a full life without faith. We can get up in the morning, gulp down a bowl of cereal, drive to work in a daze, push a pencil for 8 hours, and come home at night and call that living. But without faith, we cannot really be alive. People who have no faith live in a void. They have a strange sense of emptiness in their lives, a vacuum, a thirst that can send them around the world. It is hard to find the fulfillment that comes only from God in a culture that places so much emphasis on self.
I met a master of self-fulfillment a couple of years ago, Richard, a 36-year-old lawyer from Illinois. To his surprise and mine, found himself on our doorstep one day. He was a man who had everything, and plenty of it: power, prestige, position, as well as a wife he described as a terrific lady and 2 super kids. But all was not well with the man who had everything, for he had a spiritual chip on his shoulder. Richard wasted no time before insulting me. After a nasty remark about our Franciscan habit, he started interrogating me about monastic life and my insane decision to escape the real world. If you ever wanted a flat in a man twice your size, you know what it means to be Italian. So I returned the punch, basically. She says, "You have a fine job and a beautiful family, don't you?" "Of course I do," he said. "Do you have any favorite pastimes?" "I enjoy sailing and I like to jog every morning." "Do you ever travel?" "Oh, I take my wife to Europe every year." "Do you have all the money that you think you will ever need?" "More than I'd ever admit to you." "So you must be very happy," I said quietly. It was then that Richard looked out the window with eyes that began to well up. "No, I'm not," he said haltingly. "And I can't stand the fact that you and all your nuns truly are happy." Richard was discovering the hard truth, that he had been searching for the very thing he had been running from. The last thing he had ever wanted was for God to be his answer. He wanted to be the self-sufficient, self-fulfilled, his own man, a man who owed nothing and answered to no one. Like so many of us, he had sought meaning in his work, his possessions, his perfect lifestyle. He poured everything he had into the real world, quote unquote. But the real world never gave back anything of lasting value. We all know that on some level our escapes are not escapes at all. We immerse ourselves in workaholism or alcoholism or drugs or sin and end up dissatisfied and guilty. We bury our need for God in 1,001 activities, chasing this promise and that promise, better skin, sharper minds, perfect dinner parties, exciting sports, and loving friends. But as new and improved as we can make ourselves, as much as Madison Avenue and Main Street, USA have to offer, we still come up with an odd sort of restlessness, an uneasiness, a sadness that caused one man to ask me in a letter, "Is there life after a new Rolls Royce?" Show me a woman who goes from relationship to relationship, or an executive who lives in the fast lane, or a teenager who's addicted to music videos, or a scientist who spends every waking moment in his lab, and I'll show you someone who is desperately trying to dodge God. If you think that everyone who believes in God has been struck down by lightning, guess again. Faith for most of us comes in tiny, ordinary steps, and the first step is generally an impatience with the world as we know it. This can't be all there is, we say to any and all who will listen. Because in truth, the emptiness is not just part of being human, but is permitted by God for a special purpose. It is God calling us to Him, letting us know that as hard and fast as we look, we will never again be satisfied until we know and believe in Him. What most of us don't realize is that you and I were made by God to know, love, and serve Him. We weren't created to just eat, drink, and be merry. Nor were we created only to punch a time clock or whatever else it is that we do every day. No, our primary mission in life, the answer to why are we alive, is to love and serve God. The key is that we accept and understand that our real purpose in life is to be God-centered, not self-centered. Once we recognize this truth, we begin to see that emptiness, restlessness, and thirst are inevitable whenever we distance ourselves from God. We can now understand that midlife crises are born of the fact that we've spent half a lifetime barking up the wrong tree. We were made for God, and without Him, we are going to be out of kilter, dissatisfied, and quietly desperate. A person who accepts the fact that he belongs to God has taken the most important step to believing. Well, my mind is going back many years now to a country club where I was the head golf pro, and a group of guys that were 70 plus years of age who spent every waking day at that club playing cards and criticizing the world. And no doubt I was part of that. And take my word that God was hardly the prime topic of conversation, if at all. Incredibly sad and fascinating that they could be at that age and not be talking once in a while about what's upcoming. And this is what Mother is talking about with regard to Richard. They just want to try to go into denial zone that work or play is all there is. And they'll just stay busy at both and then hope that the curtain eventually falls quickly. They don't want to think about the most meaningful, important day of their life upcoming. And this is the shallowness of life, and having spent more than a few years of my whole life around golf, playing since the age of 7 and spending a bulk of my career as a PGA golf professional, believe me, I know what she's talking about. And the game of golf is great, but that world that revolves around it is too often lacking. So don't become Richard. Enjoy the game as the weather turns nicely, but don't hang out in the restaurant too long afterwards. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM, your lesson tee every week. And before everyone sails off to that golf course for summer vacation time, we will accept your donation to get us through the summer. God bless. Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.